Hello, this is Alban from NORTHAN Viking Silver. Welcome back to these series of films about the history of runes and rune magic. Now, in this film, I want to give you a general sense of what runes were being used for at this time before beginning to zero in on their use in magical practice. Okay, so let's consider the early inscriptions first. When I say early, I mean 2nd to 7th centuries. Okay, so most of these inscriptions are really simple, just a word or two, and often they're really puzzling for runologists to read. But since these films are only intended as a brief introduction to the subject, I'm going to skate over all this linguistic difficulty and controversy about what the inscriptions actually mean. So please beware, I am giving you an oversimplified picture. In fact, let me quote the archaeologist David Wilson, who said, "There is a first law of runodynamics. For every inscription, there shall be as many interpretations as there are scholars working on it. So you have been warned." Most of the early inscriptions record people's names or the maker's name. For example, remember those Illarup bog finds where the war gear had been thrown into the sacrificial bog after a battle? That's from the 2nd century. One of those inscriptions was scratched on a shield mount and it reads, "Neithio made this." Neithio is the guy's name. Another mount simply has the word Swarta, which means black, probably also a name. Another example is there's a spearhead from Darmensdorf in Germany, which has Ranja inlaid in it, which means terrifier or bringer of fear. Often inscriptions simply record the inscriber's name, like Bozo rat runa, Bozo wrote runes. So this is an example of the early stuff, very simple, usually, not always. It's interesting to think for a moment that the most common form of graffiti today is also just recording people's names. Then in the years 350 to 550, along come bractiates. Now, a bractiate is a gold disc used as a pendant. I need to show you a picture. No technology is spared in the making of this film. So this is a picture of a bractiate, gold disc, male head. You have to bear in mind the originals are really small, like only a couple of centimetres across. Here's some other pics. Enlarged ones. So look, here we have a horse figure, a male head, and an inscription of runes around the edge. Another example over here with runes down the bottom. So this is what bractiates look like. So the history of bractiates goes like this. The Roman emperors sent gold medallions to the Germanic tribes as gifts. They looked like coins. They had the emperor's head on and a Latin inscription. You know, they're like a golden gift from the big man himself. And the tribes loved these bractiates, but they started to make their own. So over the next couple of hundred years, they made a lot of them. They got rid of the image of the emperor because that wasn't important to them. And instead they brought on the image of a man or a god, sometimes with a horse or with birds. It seems that they wore them hanging from their belts. Over 900 of them have been found all over the place, most commonly Denmark, in both male and female graves, interestingly enough. Now runes are really fashionable on these. About a third of these bractiates have runic inscriptions. And guess what? Nearly all of them are really hard or impossible to read. Now, does this mean that the rune writer is illiterate and he's just pretending to write? Or do the runes have a symbolic significance rather than actually spelling something out? Well, welcome to the world of runology. I should say that it's very difficult to interpret these things and it's uncertain, but some of the words are generally accepted as magical words, and I'll come on to those later. But moving on with this quick look at runes through the ages, onto the 8th century, runestones catch on, first in Norway and Sweden, then moving into Denmark. As I said earlier, the runestones are mostly memorial inscriptions, Most of them are 11th century with Christian symbols and dragons. Let's have another quick picture, just to give you an idea. If you haven't seen one before, example of a rune stone, dragon figures around with the runes carved inside, and here look, the Christian cross at the top. Now the Anglo Saxons are also producing runic monuments. Let me find my place in my notes. Oh yeah. So they're making crosses with runes inscribed in. Some of these crosses actually have carvings of pagan stories in the cross itself. So it's a weird combination of Christian and pagan tradition. Then the Anglo-Saxons also have, there's that scrammer sax I talked about earlier with the inscription along the top of the blade, a couple of finger rings and a few other objects. Now for the 8th to the 11th centuries, which I refer to as the Viking Age, the Vikings left a lot of inscriptions, some of them scratched on everyday objects, often also recording names. So we have on the scabbard fitting on a sword scabbard, we have an inscription that says Domhnall Sealshead owns this sword. Or let's have another look at a pick. So this is a comb case. I don't know if it's obvious, but the comb would fit in the top of the case here. It's a bone comb case. Here are the runes inscribed along the bottom, and they say Cam Godan Gjarthi Thorfastar, which means Thorfast made a good comb. So still pretty simple stuff by modern standards, but the good thing about these later inscriptions is it's much easier to interpret them and to translate them. I want to have another look, or a quick look, at another major group of inscriptions before we start to investigate magical use of runes. And these are the rune sticks that come from medieval Norway. That's like 12th to 15th century. So this is like a kind of messaging system. If you imagine cutting a feather into a quill, making ink, scraping parchment, it's a lot of trouble to go to. So what these merchants were doing is they would simply take a stick, carve it flat with a belt knife and scratch their message or label into the wood. And we have hundreds of these rune sticks left from medieval Norway, mostly from the town of Bergen. A lot of them are just labels for merchandise, but there are some interesting ones that give us an insight into daily life. So, for example, there was a stick found in the excavation of a tavern, which delivers a message from a woman called Gudr. Gudr segir at du gak heim. Gudr says you are to go home. We have another one, also from a tavern, I think. It says, Munde ek mikler optar mjothrans til kamanala. I would much rather come to the mead house more often. Well, these films are made in lockdown, all the pubs are closed, so I certainly feel for that message. So as we've seen, runes are a writing system. They're put to all kinds of uses, like any writing system, and this also then includes writing spells. But do you think runes were magical symbols in themselves, more than just letters? They were used to write magical charms, and some people argue that this doesn't mean that there's anything sacred or magical about them, they're just sound symbols. Conversely, there are other people who argue that the rune was or is a magical symbol as well as representing a sound value. Well, let's have a look at the evidence for this. First of all, I want to consider, where does the word rune come from? Because this will give us a clue to its magical significance. What is the etymology of the word? Like everything to do with runes, the answer to this question isn't that simple. There seem to be two roots for this ancient word. One is related to the modern English row, meaning something written in a row. And, certainly throughout all the earliest inscriptions throughout history, the word rune always means a written letter. But there's another etymology related to the modern English word rumour, and to the modern German word raunen, to whisper. And this other root means something secret. So the Goths, way back in the 4th century, used the word rune to translate the Greek word mysterion, a mystery. The Anglo Saxons also used the word rune to mean secret, as do some Old Norse and Old High German sources. So it seems that these two roots came together into one meaning with a sense of a silent or a written message. But the word also quickly becomes associated with magic, as we can see if we look at some of the oldest uses of the word rune. So the Goths used the word Rune, hell rune, to mean sorceress. The Anglo-Saxons used hell rune to mean seeress or prophetess. Old High German uses the expression hell runes to mean necromancy. But if this all sounds a bit Satanist, remember that hell is actually a Germanic word. It's come to mean the realm of Satan in Christian belief, but it's actually older. It has an older pre-Christian meaning as simply the goddess of the dead or the land of the dead. This is because in Germanic tradition, the dead were believed to have knowledge of the future. So if they were consulted by a sorcerer or sorceress, they could give knowledge of the future and could be used to prophesy. So hence there's this connection between hell runes and talking to the dead. It doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the fiery hell of Christian damnation. We also have in Old High German the word Rune, meaning song rune, and this is just their word for sorcerer. So the word rune doesn't always mean written letters. It also means something mysterious or magical, and the old uses of the word tell us this. Which brings me to the end of this film. In the next film, I'm going to look at how we know about ancient Germanic culture, how has this knowledge survived, and in particular, what do we know about their magical practices. See you then.